We've had a lot of fun and a lot of things geared towards our children, and I want to ask, I'm going to try this in 10 minutes. Now, if you're here every week, please don't hold me to this every week, okay? All right. There's really two things I want to talk about in 10 minutes, or real close to that. I want to talk about you and God, and I want to talk about you and your family, okay? So kids, this is especially for your parents, but if you listen too, you might learn something. But if you can try to be quiet and let them listen as best you can, that would be great, okay? All right. Now, I was going to tell you in the announcements to listen carefully to the scriptures because there might be a quiz. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you, so hey, this is a pop quiz. All right. Think carefully. Psalm 23, many of you know it, and then Psalm 121. And I'll help you out a little bit. I want you to help me think of three, we might say geological or topographical features that are mentioned in those two psalms. Okay? The theme today for what I want to share with you is meditations from the Meadow, because the Psalms were written, most of them by David, who was a shepherd. And meadow and pasture are kind of the same thing, aren't they? All right? So these are poems that he wrote, and we want to see what we can learn. So let's see what earth features are mentioned in the 23rd Psalm that have something to do with elevation or altitude. Okay? All right, now one of them might seem like it has nothing to do with altitude. What's the main setting for the 23rd Psalm? Green meadows or pasture, right? Meadows. That's the main setting. Is a meadow real high? Is a meadow real low? It's kind of normal, right? Okay. There's one other mention in that psalm about something that's not normal. Okay, you remember what that is? I hear someone, I'm not thinking of still water. Yeah, we could say altitude, sea level. No, it's not that one. Even though I walk through the valley. Is valley high? It's low. All right? So we've got 2 out of 3. You're doing great. Now Psalm 121. I will lift up my eyes to the hills. Okay? Are hills low? Are they high? Ah, you guys are great. No wonder you have such smart kids. Okay. Now I want to use a little license, and I want to talk about mountaintop. I want to talk about valleys, and I want to talk about the normal, which is the meadow or the pasture. And I think it's interesting, even that psalm that says, I will lift up my eyes to the hills, really what that psalm says, it doesn't say I'm going to lift up my eyes to the hills from where my help comes. I think the best translations say, no, it's saying, I'm going to lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? And the answer is, not from the hills. My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. I want to suggest there's something inside of us that longs for the mountaintops. I mean, we all do, for the excitement, for the time when it's so easy, when life is great, and it's so easy to believe that God is there. And everything's the way it should be. And those are the mountaintops, right? I want to suggest that the valleys, that's pretty easy, right? Those are the low times. Those are the hard times. Those are the times when we really doubt, is there even a God? And you know what's interesting? I think a lot of times we end up bouncing between the two, where we're desperate for the mountaintops, and then the valleys come and it just knocks the props out from under us. And so often in life, we're bouncing between the two. But what we forget is that God is present. He's present in all three, really. He is present in those times when he leads us to these exhilarating experiences, kind of like the first song we sang, How Great Thou Art. Sometimes we just go out in nature and we're so overwhelmed with the beauty and the diversity and everything, and we just say, wow, and that's kind of a mountaintop experience. And God is there very much. But we're not there all the time. And there are times when we're down in the valley, when life is really hard and we're struggling, and the good news is that God is there too. What does that part of the psalm say? Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, our worst fear, what does the psalmist say? I will fear no evil. I don't have to be afraid. Why? Because thou art with me. God is with us even in the valley. But the bulk of that psalm is talking about where? Most of that song, the Lord is my shepherd. And where do shepherds spend most of their time? In the meadow. With the sheep, because that's where the sheep are, in the meadow. And I want to suggest that most of our life is not on the mountaintop, though we wish it were sometimes. Most of our life is not in the valley, though we have those. Most of our life is the normal everyday meadow. And what I want to encourage us with is to be comfortable with living in the everyday meadow, knowing that that's where our shepherd is too. And in the everyday, our shepherd is working what? To give us what we need, to lead us beside still waters, to lead us in green pastures, to protect us, to provide for us, to watch over us. And in terms of our relationship with God, I want to challenge us that even what we do to get to know and trust the shepherd, we would love to have everything be mountaintop, but it's not. And I think it's not for a reason, because we really get to know the shepherd best in the everyday. And I want to suggest in your life, in trying to get to know and trust God, to not just think about, okay, every once in a while I'm going to do something big and exciting, or I'm going to wait until I really need him when I'm in the valley, and then I'm going to turn to God. I think what's really important is that we find ways to nurture every day in the normal, every day in the meadow, in the meadow, in the pasture, to get to know God in the everyday. Now, I told you I was going to talk about you and God and you and your family. Now I want to bring this full circle, and I want you to think about how important the everyday is. 3 primary relationships for you parents and your family. You and your spouse, you and your children, and for most of you, I hope your parents are still with you, you and your parents. Think about this mountaintop, this valley, and this everyday meadow in those 3 areas. Let's start. I'm going to step on toes here. Let's start with you and your spouse. This isn't going to be long. Scripture is filled with things that tell us about how to love our spouse and how to get along and how to serve our spouse. I want you to think in terms of mountaintop, meadow, and valley. Are there times in our relationship when we are content in trying to build a good relationship with just, as long as I provide a couple mountaintops, let's see, birthday, anniversary, Valentine's Day, I probably should do something nice for Christmas. And we go all out and we do something big, and then we say, well, isn't that enough? I'm going to pick on the men here this morning and ask the ladies, is that enough? I'm going to give you one more chance. Ladies, is that enough? Okay, thank you. And to be honest, for us men, it's not enough either. And we might say, oh, but if you really need me, I'll be there. Well, now what are we talking about? We're talking about the valley, right? We're talking about the crisis. Is that a way to build a healthy relationship when it's just the mountaintop and the valley? Isn't a healthy relationship really made in the meadow, in the everyday? Developing into the everyday habits of relationship and of healthy connecting and caring for one another like a shepherd would the sheep? Okay, you're starting to get. Let's think about us and our kids. And again, dads, it's so easy to think in terms of mountaintop and valley. Oh, I'm going to work real hard, but we're going to have a vacation. And that's the mountaintop where all this intense time. And if there's a crisis, I'll be there. But what about the everyday? Are we taking times, and this is moms and dads, are we taking time every day to build that relationship? Are we developing habits and patterns of a healthy relationship in the day-to-day? That's what matters. That's where the strength is built. And let's not forget grandparents. So you parents, as you go through the stages of life, as your parents are getting older, our family's right in the middle of this. For the last several years, my parents have been especially the last year, in crisis mode, living 3 hours away. And as I was preparing this, I was thinking, it's interesting. Our relationship has been kind of mountaintop and valley. It's been the extremes. It's been, we're going to be sure we're out there to celebrate Dad's 90th birthday. We're going to be sure we're out there for special times. At Christmas, we're going to try to get out there. And then it's the crisis times, and there have been a lot of crisis times this last year. About a month ago, we made a very tough decision with my parents and with my siblings, because none of us lived near them 3 hours away. And so this past week, we moved them here to Harleysville. We're going to be taking on a lot more of their care. They're not with us, but they're 3 minutes away. And our life is changing. It's no longer the mountaintops and the valleys. It's the everyday. That can be a little scary, but it's exciting too for us and for them. And I just feel so blessed to have this chance in this chapter of their lives to be able to have that routine built in and to nurture that relationship. And whether you're a parent or a grandparent here today, I think you can understand, if you had to choose, which is the strongest and which is what really gives us that peace that God is trying to offer us through his presence as well. So it's a little bit of a stretch, but take these thoughts with you. When you think of the meadow as our normal everyday life. And be grateful for the mountaintops when they come. Be grateful that in the valleys we have each other and that God promises to be with us through it all. But don't minimize the importance of the meadow. In your relationship with God, nurture it every day. In your relationship with your spouse, with your children, with your parents, every day. Do what it takes to make it strong and to build and to communicate your love for each other.